Hello everyone and welcome back to another IELTS speaking video. So in the lesson today, we'll be moving on to the area of grammatical range and accuracy, which is one of the marking criteria that you'll be assessed on during your speaking exam. And we're going to focus on gerunds and infinitives in particular, because like prepositions, you'll be learning this area throughout your English studies. And it's especially needed to create more complex sentences that you'll need to attain the higher band scores on your exam. So without any further ado, let's get into it and I will share my screen with you now. Okay, so let's start with some very basic examples of sentence structure before getting into this topic today. Whenever you put together a basic clause or sentence in English, it usually follows the typical subject, verb, object pattern, okay? Now, this becomes a little bit more complicated when you add another verb, okay? In some languages, it's quite simple. The second verb doesn't change too much when you use it. However, in English, it can change quite a few times depending on the first verb, okay? Or the first word or phrase. It doesn't always have to be a verb, but it usually is. So let's look at some examples here. If I just cut out the second verb, then we've got the usual subject, verb, object pattern. So I enjoy tennis or I want lunch, all right? But as I say, the tricky part is when you add a second verb. So we've got three categories and three possibilities for a particular form that follows these words and phrases. And they could be either with ing or the gerund form. These are the same in this case. The infinitive form or the base form. Now, you might see this explained a little differently depending on the grammar book you use. But in this lesson, when I say infinitive, it means the verb with to. And then when I say the base form, it means the verb without to. Okay? Now, what decides whether a word is followed by ing, infinitive, or base form? Well, it all depends on the first verb. Okay? So in this case, the word enjoy is always followed by ing. Okay, so it could be enjoy playing, enjoy doing, enjoy going, and then you finish the sentence. And this doesn't change even if you change the tense of the word enjoy. We can put this in the past and add ed, so I enjoyed. Now, if you do that, it does not change the second verb at all, okay? So it's still I enjoyed playing tennis, okay? And this grammar system is the same for the infinitive, except you have to remember to actually follow the word want, for example, with an infinitive. So the word want is always followed by the infinitive. You say want to do, want to play, want to go, etc. And again, if you put it in the past, you only change the verb want. So I wanted to have lunch, okay? You only need to change that first verb. So in English, we have a variety of verbs or words and phrases that are followed by ing, and then we have a variety of them that are followed by the infinitive. And unfortunately, there is no one good rule for them. And this is why I said in the intro that you'll still be learning about this at the very advanced levels of English. And this is because you'll still be learning which types of verbs or words and phrases are actually followed by either ing or the infinitive. But don't worry, I have a pretty comprehensive list on my website if you're working on my website at the bottom of the lesson where you can study these. And then we have obviously our usual exercises to practice them. Now, before we move on, we have fewer examples of things that are followed by the base form in English, but still some very important examples. So a word as common as make is normally followed by the base form, okay? So I've already put this in the past. She made him do his homework. So it's not to do, it's not doing, it's do. Okay. And if you're not sure what that means, it means she forced him to do his homework. But you can see if I change the verb to force, forced, then it becomes the infinitive. She forced him to do his homework. But if you use it like this and use make in the past, it is followed by do. All right. Now, before we move on, usually at the intermediate level, you'll find some verbs that are followed by both ing and infinitive, and they can even change in their meaning. But we're not going to focus on that in this particular video, and we're just going to focus on when to use each category, and we're going to move on to that right now. Now, even though there is no good rule that tells you which verbs are followed by which category, I can at least give you a list of guidelines about when certain types of words are followed by each category. So let's start with some particular groups that are followed by ing. So as we've mentioned before, it comes after certain verbs like finish, enjoy, miss, etc. And I have an example with the word finish here, so I'll do it after I finish writing this. And finish normally tricks people. A lot of people think it's followed by the infinitive, but it isn't. Another category is after prepositions, and this is a good one to know. I've mentioned it in previous videos, and this is an example sentence that I mentioned before that a lot of students make mistakes with. Because they see I look forward to, they think it's part of an infinitive, and they say I look forward to meet you. But it isn't. I look forward to is its own set phrase, meaning I am excited about or something similar. So it's its own phrase. So to is counted as its own preposition. And after prepositions, we use ing. So I look forward to meeting you. Okay, after certain phrases or phrasal verbs, because as we know, phrasal verbs contain prepositions. So, do you plan on staying in England? Now, this is another good point to mention. The word plan on its own is actually followed by the infinitive. So if I remove on, which doesn't change much in meaning actually in this case, I would use the infinitive. So do you plan to stay in England would be the correct way of saying that. But because I've turned it into a phrasal verb and added the preposition on, this now becomes staying. Okay. Right, on to the infinitive. Again, it is followed by certain verbs. So volunteer, learn, afford, etc. And you'll see longer lists of these on my website. But let's look at one example here. I can't afford to buy those shoes. All right. Now, another category I can give you is that after certain adjectives, we use the infinitive. So these students are eager to learn. All right. This exercise is difficult to understand. And a lot of these adjectives are followed by the infinitive. Okay, this is another good one to know. When we give reason or purpose, we use the infinitive. And this is actually called the infinitive of purpose. Now, if you speak a language like Spanish, whenever you say what you're doing and then the reason, a lot of times this gets translated to for, all right? But that's not how we say it in English. So for example, I'm doing this, something. Why? To make money, okay? And you give the purpose or the reason. So you don't say for make, it's just to make, all right? It's a shorter way of saying in order to, all right? Now let's move on to the base form. So after modal verbs are words like can, should, must, etc. And I've got an example here. I must start this at some point. Next, after modal phrases, not all of them, but this one especially, so would rather, I would rather go out tonight than stay at home. That has a similar meaning to prefer. And you can see that both clauses use the base form. And then, as I mentioned in the previous screen, after a few verbs like make, let, and help. And then it's not always the first verb, it's the next verb as well that decides what the following word will be, and you'll end up with a sentence like this. So let me help you carry your bags. And each one of them uses that base form. Okay? Right, that's all from me. So if you're working on my website, as always, you can now scroll down to do the follow-up exercises and the final interactive task, which will focus on IELTS speaking part 2. And then, of course, the list I mentioned in the video will definitely help you with that task. So as always, thank you very much for joining me, and I look forward to seeing you all in another video very soon.